Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today with your hosts Kyle Buller and Joe Moore. This is Kyle, and for this episode, I am interviewing and talking with Alyssa Gursky, who's a master's student over at Naropa University with a focus in mental health counseling and transpersonal art therapy. You may remember Alyssa from some previous episodes in the past. We had her on about a few months ago, but unfortunately there was some weird digital static throughout the episode. I think there was some sort of hardware issue that we were having and didn't notice it until, post interview and in post production. So I'm been over in Jersey City for the past 2 weeks, just hanging out at a friend's house sitting, and Alyssa flew back to the East Coast from Colorado, and we decided to meet up to have a better quality audio experience and to help get her story out there. So Alyssa is doing some really awesome things. Like I said, she is at Naropa University currently studying clinical mental health counseling with a focus in transpersonal art therapy. So we talk about the intersections of art therapy and expressive art and psychedelics. So what would that look like to incorporate art therapy after a psychedelic experience, maybe during a psychedelic experience, and just how she really got involved in art and psychedelics. Alyssa has also been part of the MAPS trial. So she was a night attendant over at the Boulder study, and now she is currently a night attendant over in Fort Collins. So she's been part of this, helping out with this research, which is really exciting. In this episode also, we get into talk about symbols and like meaning, and we end up talking about this guy, Alejandro Jodorowsky, Chilean, I always want to say mystic. I think Alyssa said that he does practice some sort of therapy, but kind of really formed psychodrama, and he's a really big influence in Alyssa's life. So, and it was interesting because I had a supervisor that was really into Jodorowsky, so we naturally just kind of started talking about that. We also explore Alyssa's experience with ketamine psychotherapy. And, this is really interesting, being a graduate student, helping out with the MAPS trials, studying kind of psychedelic therapy, trying to build a career in that, but also kind of being on the other side and receiving a form of kind of psychedelic therapy, even though, ketamine isn't technically classified as a psychedelic, but, it can produce transpersonal states and, have those qualities as well. So we talk about like what the protocol looks like for her, how she goes about doing it. And, ketamine is really interesting. There's been some articles surfacing recently about ketamine and depression and how it can really help with that. And so, we talk about maybe things to look for in like ketamine clinics, because there's lots of different models operating. We do kind of throw our bias in there about ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. But, I think it's important if you are searching for this therapy, there's only so many options available. And, you if you're looking for something like this and if you think it could be beneficial, maybe not be so picky. But, I think from our conversation, we're just really trying to think about like how if we were to do this work, how would we do it? Maybe it is adding more psychotherapy to the sessions instead of just infusion and whatnot. And ketamine is really interesting since the Michael Pollan book has come out, and I don't know if this is directly correlated, but it's been interesting getting emails on like people searching for guides and stuff like that. Technically and legally we can't really give you any info on that, but we can point you in some legal directions, whether that's going to Peru, going to Jamaica or the Netherlands, or participating in ketamine therapy or finding breath work. So, I think the ketamine therapy is really interesting. Some other things that we end up chatting about in this episode is just being a graduate student and being kind of a young professional wanting to get involved in psychedelic research. And, we're almost at this like really interesting time where you could possibly make a career out of, psychedelic therapy. So really exciting for those therapists or counselors that listen that are really into psychology. Me and Alyssa did have a little slip up or brain fart about Freud's complexes. So the Oedipus and the Electra complexes. And I don't know, for some reason we just kept getting stuck on the Oedipus complex. So just tossing that out there. And so I really hope you guys enjoy this episode. I had a blast talking to Alyssa, hoping to get her partner on in the future to talk about some Wim Hof breathing. He's doing some really cool stuff out there in Boulder. And so, if you guys enjoy the show, if you're, listener and haven't clicked subscribe or left us a review on iTunes or Stitcher, Joe and I definitely appreciate that. So you could head over to iTunes, or I don't know how it works. I'm an Android person, so I use Stitcher. But the podcast app, I think you can leave a review in there, hopefully on the, if you're an iPhone user, or, leave us a review on Facebook. Other ways to support the show, you could go head on over to patreon.com/Psychedelics Today and leave a monthly donation. That could be $1, it could be $2. In the process of kind of reorganizing some of those tiers to have more meetups and whatnot, so virtual meetups. Hopefully by the time this episode's recorded, I'll already have that hashed out. So, if you haven't checked out Patreon, go on over there and check it out. Thanks so much for listening and supporting our show. We really appreciate it. Joe and I have hit our 2-year mark, which is super exciting. And we have been looking at the download numbers, and it's pretty awesome. So, we can't really thank you guys enough. You guys are so awesome. Thanks so much for listening and supporting the show. Joe and I are like, wow, we did not expect, I guess, the show to grow this much. Well, maybe we did. I don't know. But it's just really awesome to see the wonderful support and seeing some of those numbers there. And we're really excited that, this little side project has lasted 2 years. And we're so grateful to be offering content and interviews to everybody and education. So, we couldn't do this without you. So, just thanks so much. And for the people that are supporting us on Patreon, thank you for your support and helping to keep the lights on. So, enjoy the show with Alyssa. All right. Hello and welcome back to Psychedelics Today. I am here with Alyssa Gursky, a student over at Naropa, coming back for some redemption. I'm really sorry about our last episode. There's
totally okay.
Some weird digital noise on our end. I don't know. I think it was like hardware stuff. But you're back. We're in person. We're going to get a cleaner interview to get out for you. So I'm excited. Perfect. Unfortunately, Joe's not here, but that's okay.
We can hold it down.
Yeah, we can hold it down. So, how about a little intro? What do you do? How'd you get involved in psychedelics? And
where do I start? Okay, so as you said, I'm at Naropa University. I'm studying art therapy. I have been involved with the MDMA research in Boulder and now in Fort Collins for the last 3 years. I act as a night attendant. So once a participant does the experimental MDMA sessions, I stay overnight. I ensure safety and I provide emotional support if needed.
Awesome. And how long have you been doing that for?
3 years.
3 years.
About that.
Sweet. I didn't know you were going up to Fort Collins.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So you'll be working with Dr. Shannon and stuff like that? Sweet.
Scott and Craig. Amazing team up there.
And how did you get involved in psychedelics, or what kind of piqued your interest in getting involved?
That's a good question. I think I tried psychedelics for the first time when I was 16. I was, at that time, unknowingly working with some depression, symptoms of PTSD, and really was unhappy with the standard American model for treating it. Medications didn't help. And I remember a friend made an offer to me that, you should try mushrooms. Maybe it'll help. And I decided to move to Colorado that night and kind of never looked back. Yeah. So I just had a gut feeling that this was supposed to be my path. I started my undergraduate at Naropa.
Mm-hmm.
I was studying transpersonal and humanistic psychology, and I haven't left since.
Awesome. Yeah, it's cool. We were just talking a little bit about before about being like young professionals or young students, kind of being on the edge of this new growing field, and what is that like? And I mean, did you ever think you were going to study psychedelics or even think about having a career as possibly a psychedelic psychotherapist?
I always wanted to do art therapy. I was always amazed by the healing nature of art. That has been with me my entire life. But once I had consumed psychedelics and then created art, there was just this amazing synergy. So I think after that experience, there was kind of no turning back. It was like something in my body was like, these two have to be together. And I remember Googling like mushroom therapy, like psychedelics in therapy, and finding maps and just being like, oh shit. Somebody's already doing this. People have already thought of this. Yeah. And then looking back and seeing like the rich history, going back to the Shulgins, going back to Leo Zeff, just really realizing how deep, I mean, and then shamanism, realizing people have been doing this for thousands of years was, oh, wait, I'm not a genius. People have been doing this. Yeah, but I feel really lucky. This community is loving and welcoming and love some young blood.
Yeah. And how did you get involved in MAPS?
I emailed Rick totally on a whim. Was brief. Was like, hi, I just moved to Boulder. I would love to get involved in the studies. And there must have been a shooting star over my head at that exact moment because he answered me within an hour. That's
crazy. I've emailed Rick once or twice and never heard back.
That's the thing. Rick, I'm so sorry if your emails go up from this, but yeah, I got really lucky. That's why I think there was just something pulling me to this. There was no other option. I was kind of supposed to do this work. And it's interesting because, I mean, traditional shamanism says that, you're chosen in your childhood.
Yep.
It's like the medicine path isn't something you really choose. And that was amazing for me. And the medicines that I'm really called to work with are ketamine and MDMA. And those, to the best of my knowledge, are synthesized in the UK or synthesized in Europe. And all of my DNA is European. So there's like this strong feeling of, okay, like at least I'm not claiming the title of like a medicine woman, but instead a psychedelic psychotherapist, which feels, I don't know, I'm always trying to be cognizant of cultural appropriation, but that kind of feels to me like the most sound path.
So this is interesting, and it might go a little bit off topic, but this concept I've been really thinking about lately. Like, you bring up this idea of a calling, being called to this path. And traditionally, like, for example, when I had my near-death experience, that really opened me up. And then I found like shamanism during my transpersonal studies, and my teacher said, if you were part of a traditional culture, the elder would have stepped in and kind of taught you what you needed to know how to navigate this new way of being. And so, I've always been attracted to shamanism just because I studied a lot of it during my undergrad and this and that. But I think about that cultural appropriation thing a little bit, and also like my own roots. And I believe like we're all kind of indigenous of somewhere, right? But then I think about like my cultural narrative is in like therapy. Right. And so, you could add elements of shamanism to your cultural narrative, say this like European way of working with individuals through psychology and counseling. But yeah, I don't know. I've been really thinking about this a lot lately because I've been feeling more and more called to kind of step into some more work. And then I'm just like, the shamanism part calls to me, but I'm also, doing this counseling degree. And I think like that's the narrative I know the most. And it's kind of part of my European ancestry, right?
Yeah. Well, what are the aspects of shamanism that attract you? Is it the ritual? Is it like what? How can it be secularized? Like what are the secular versions of those rich aspects that call you?
Yeah, it's like the ritual, working with elements. And then, I mean, I guess the biggest part that calls to me is working with people in non-ordinary states. So breath work, drumming, kind of doing journey work like that, or, psychedelic work in the future.
Yeah. That's the interesting thing. I know I talk about Jodorowsky all the time, but that's what psychomagic is for me. I mean, he calls it shamanic psychotherapy, but it's really, really distilled down to a practice of prescribing rituals for people and working with metaphor and working with the unconscious. And I mean, Huxley's concept of the divine ground kind of changed everything for me. For those who are unfamiliar, Aldous Huxley posed that underneath all spiritual traditions, there's the same juice. There's the same transpersonal is a good word for it, but that spiritual goodness that kind of connects everything. Yeah, as a psychotherapist, I see myself working in like a secular magic way.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's ever going to be secular, but...
Right. Well, yeah, I think it's like taking some of those core elements and learning how to work with it, how you work with it. And I mean, it's interesting too, because the teacher that I worked with was part Cherokee, Lakota, had European roots, but he was also a psychotherapist. And he would kind of weave that in and out. But, he had more indigenous roots to the Americas than I guess I do. And so, yeah, I don't know, we're off topic, but that has been coming up a lot for me lately of like how to go about working with people, the cultural appropriation thing, But yeah, let's kind of jump back into like your work and art therapy, right? You're doing your clinical mental health counseling degree at Naropa with a focus or emphasis in, what is it, expressive art therapy or just transpersonal? Okay.
Yeah, it's the one program in the country that's transpersonal, and I feel really, really lucky to be doing it.
Yep.
So I'm going to start with a point, and then I'll circle back around to art therapy. Every time I hear somebody say, I can't draw, my art therapist brain wants to just like rope them in and give them a short lecture. So here's my elevator pitch. Being able to make art is the most intimate, in my eyes, one of the most intimate ways you can be with yourself. People tell me, oh, I can only draw stick figures. And there's this like cultural belief that art has to be beautiful and art has to be, I can look at whatever, like this cup on the table and I can draw like I see. Whereas like fine arts, that's a very valuable skill, but being able to just sit down and create an image with line, shape, and color is a gift from our unconscious mind. And to somebody who's not necessarily transpersonally oriented or is keen on art therapy, that might be really confusing. But I think that's my life's work to distill that point for people, that Alejandro Jodorowsky says that dreams are a gift from the unconscious that we didn't ask for. So there's always such rich metaphor in what's happening in our unconscious or answers to qualms that we're having. And to me, art therapy, the practice of making art, is an amazing opportunity to look at your unconscious and to just see what's happening with yourself and begin to decode the metaphors, because they're usually very simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
that's the magic for me.
How do you feel that like art therapy and psychedelics mix together? That's
my favorite question. I've been mulling this over as I officially own psychedelicarttherapy.com.
Nice.
An epic win for me.
Yeah.
So art therapy helps us capture the unconscious. It shows us a visual representation of some facet of the psyche in that moment. And psychedelics help us explore different parts of the psyche. And if you could record on paper the parts of the psyche that you're accessing in non-ordinary states, just think about the inner landscape that you're building, the inner map of yourself that you're able to build from just, continuously coming home and continuously coming back to that paper and coming back to that practice of not making art for it to be beautiful. And especially in non-ordinary states, art can get kind of weird, but just recording the psyche. I always call it a gift for your future self, because I'm also a client in ketamine therapy. We talked about that a little bit in our previous podcast, but I'm going to
we'll dive back into it again.
Yeah. I am nearing my 20th session over the last year. I've been doing it rather intensively. And after each session, I force myself to sit down and make an image. I've used the same paper, the same pastels, and being able to track my progress, especially with color palettes. I've been noticing that days that I'm working through dissociation and trauma, my images are always blue. And days that, which is totally unconscious, and days that I'm feeling empowered and learning positive skills, they're usually more colorful and are red and like warm seeming colors and things of that nature. So to be able to spread them all out and track what was happening is really, truly.
And when you say use the same paper, are you doing art on the same paper?
So the same type of paper, the same size, just to have some sort of uniform to the series, just like the same material, same type of size of paper and such.
Yeah. And so how would you view yourself like as an art therapist weaving art therapy like in psychedelic sessions? So it sounds something similar along like the way we use a mandala for breath work.
I was going to say
like,
the graph.
Yeah,
tradition.
right after session, get down, just put your expression on this piece of paper, try not to think about it. And yeah, everybody comes back to I can't draw, or like, I know I've had breathwork sessions where I'm like in it and I'm just like, oh, when am I gonna draw my mandala? And then I get caught up on it. I was like, how am I can't draw this. This is like too vivid and too much detail. I'm like, and I get worked up about it. But the times where I've just completely let go and just, I'm like, I don't really care what I draw. I'm just going to put something down. It
probably ends up beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, better than I expected.
So I guess I'll use the structure of ketamine therapy to answer your question that I've been presented with.
Cool.
My typical ketamine sessions that I'm a participant in are 2 hours long. If I was the therapist, I'd structure it, take the ketamine first, beginning to talk, set intentions, create ritual in that first little window that you have before the ketamine kicks in, letting the experience happen, and then integrating with art right after. I think I'd like to create some sort of structure with my clients where they have journals and we can bring that art into the therapy session. Because art therapy takes a really amazing divergent where there's art as therapy and there's art in therapy. So art in therapy means art is a diagnostic tool.
Right.
So we look at art as, the same way we would look at language. Your words would hold just as much weight as the image. And you'd try to analyze it and bringing the context from the art into the conversation. And it would, be another you. But art as therapy means that the art process itself is inherently therapeutic.
Right.
Being able to build that intimacy with your unconscious and yourself is the part of the therapeutic magic that one could heal just from doing that alone. So I think both in my practice will be relevant at times, whether we can analyze someone's art versus what's happening for them, looking at a series and being able to see progress and working through
themes.
It. Exactly.
Yeah.
Because words are happening in real time. A therapist can do their best to catch everything. But how much of what needs to emerge can a person not say? Is it not in the actual, their awareness, or does it not feel safe enough to voice it? Can the image act as another voice for when someone doesn't know what to say or how to say it?
Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, just the nonverbals are just so important, I think, in the healing process. And there's so much trying to really articulate through vocabulary or words about an experience can be really hard because a lot of these experiences don't have language to it. So being able to find another way to express it can be really helpful. And there's an interesting, when we do breathwork stuff, we always say, go back to your mandala, look at it. Like, okay, you might have just done a few little squiggles, doesn't make any sense, but coming back to it can be really helpful. And so our teacher actually has a really interesting story where he did a breathwork session, just put these weird lines down, some scribbles and whatnot. And it almost, he didn't know it at the time, but it was kind of foreshadowing something that was wrong with him. And his wife was like, you should really go back and look at that mandala that you did. And he looked at it and it pretty much represented stitches that he had in his neck from a biopsy and this illness that he had. He developed cancer. And all that symbolically, looking back at it, was kind of on the mandala. And this was years and years ago.
The unconscious knows.
Yeah. And the body knows too, if you're able to let go and really just tap in and just let your unconscious and body just put the art down after a session without thinking about it. I mean, there's almost like this intelligence there if you can get out of your own way.
That's it. So much of psychedelic therapy, so much of art therapy is getting out of your own way.
Yeah. I mean, even integration and all this, like, get out of your own way.
Human is just getting out of your own way. Wow. Thank you for sharing that story, because every time I hear a story like that, I'm like, this is why I'm going into debt for this. This is why it's worth it, because when we can build that relationship with the unconscious and just, like we keep saying, getting out of our own way, images can say so much.
So much, yeah. It's powerful. It's really powerful. Is there any research currently with like psychedelics and art therapy, or are you just looking at art therapy and then trying to synthesize your own type of way you would work with it? Because nobody's really examining it, right?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
Yeah.
I got an email from a woman in Ireland. She found my website and wanted to communicate, and I emailed her back, but I haven't heard back yet. But she was writing about it, but I don't think she was conducting actual research. I think her dissertation was focusing on the concept, but yeah, that's what I think needs to be done. I know in the MDMA manual, they mention that having a journal and having art supplies accessible is important, but there is no allotted time for, you're going to spend these 15 minutes making art. Other sites might do it that way, but neither of the sites that I work on, to the best of my knowledge, have.
They don't incorporate that.
Because none of them are art therapists.
Right.
They don't. It's important to say, hey, I'm going to work within what I've been trained to do. And like, yeah, sure, art is healing, but to not have somebody that's like, and like, let's work with this symbolism. Let's bring this into the room. I think it can be art as therapy. It can be therapeutic for someone who's just done 8 hours of MDMA therapy, but it's different, without an art therapist.
Do you think like during an MDMA session, would it be helpful to do art during that, or would it be more beneficial to possibly do it afterwards?
That's the fun question. So that's what I want to experiment with. During, after, if it's 10 minutes throughout the 8-hour day, so beginning, middle, end, something like that. I think it's going to change for each person, but I can't exactly say. There have been some ketamine sessions where I'm like, cool, I want to make art right now. I need to put this on paper. And then the more that I can sit and just be with that feeling of, this is so important, I need to get it out, and just holding it, I'm not going to forget. Right. If it's that important, I never forget. But I think in some moments, art can act as a way to like finish an experience and document it. But yeah, like
to help resolve some of that, whatever's going on internally.
And just sitting with it's never going to be a problem.
Right.
I'm never going to miss something because I don't do it in that moment. Yeah. But it really is an amazing closure. Like we've been saying, integration. It really helps kind of let the unconscious know that we're listening, that we respect it, and that we're, like I just said, we really want to listen to its messages.
Yeah. And so I know you're a fan of Jodorowsky.
This dress is actually from the Holy Mountain.
Oh, nice.
It's my lucky dress.
And so you keep bringing up like symbols and art and this and that. So, yeah, big influences in that realm. Is it Jung, Jodorowsky, or yeah?
It's interesting. I can tell Yodo has read a lot of Jung, because Jung is like, reading his stuff is genuinely like walking through a labyrinth. You feel really, really lost, and then all of a sudden you've circled around to a point. But Yodo is obscure and also immensely talented and grounded. And he, as a transpersonal psychotherapist, his writings have been so integral in me developing my therapeutic identity.
Is he a transpersonal psychotherapist?
He practices psychotherapy in France.
Okay.
He doesn't charge. That's the really interesting thing. My partner Justin and I are planning to go to France in December to try to find him.
Nice.
And that'll be interesting.
Isn't he Chilean?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. He doesn't live in Chile anymore?
No, he did for, I think, the first 20 or 30 years of his life. But he's been in France since the 50s, somewhere around then. 50s or 60s or 70s, somewhere in that window. Yeah, so he wrote a book, Psychomagic, that I keep referencing.
Mm-hmm.
It is my third time reading it.
Nice.
Because it's so important and just reminds me why I'm doing what I'm doing. His big thing is, so art therapy, the essence of it is the unconscious gives us gifts, much like dreams. We can analyze them and learn from them. His wisdom is doing the opposite too. So listening to the unconscious, but also writing prescriptions or detailed ritual acts that are sending a message back to the unconscious. Like, hey, I hear you, and here's a gift right back. And sometimes the acts are obscure and grotesque that I totally won't describe on air. But he sees miraculous results that don't make sense. Yeah, I highly recommend reading that.
The supervisor that I worked with at this residential home, he was so into Jodorowsky. This is like when I first came across his work.
You gotta connect this.
Yeah, we bought all of his books. We bought the movies, his tarot deck, and all that. He was just super into it. But somebody was talking about like a death experience, and so the supervisor was like, "Well, maybe we can just create a death ritual for you. You want to create your own coffin?"
Yes,
you know, and he really kind of
exactly.
took that from that Jodorowsky influence, I guess, of creating these very odd rituals. And it's interesting to participate in that. I've been thinking a lot about this with like integration or just life and participating in this relationship that we have in the world.
Yeah.
Your relationship to the universe, your relationship to everything. And, you know, this I feel like is very shamanic in the sense of having a relationship with these, whatever that is, and then interacting with it. So if it's calling you to do something, how do you participate in that? Is it giving it an offering or a gift? Is it voicing and talking or like voicing your opinion to it and screaming or, you know, whatever that is? I don't know.
Yeah. There's one that I just reread where he had a boy come to him and express that he had like the classic Freudian complex. I can't remember the name of it, with your mother, where is it an Oedipus complex? Where you want to fuck your mom and kill your dad? Sorry. So. Oh, totally just cursed.
Yeah, I always mix that up with the Oedipus complex, right?
Yeah.
Is that it? Oedipus and...
I think it's Oedipus.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm not... I space out on Freud every once in a while.
Most transpersonal people are allergic to Freud.
But he's the kind of like... the father of like, you know, somatic stuff, depth psychology. I mean, some of his stuff is really interesting.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you do have a resistance to him, I'd say just, you know, look at it and see how it influenced a lot of this field.
Yeah. I think he definitely gets scapegoated in a lot of ways, but he also was a little dark in many
definitely.
ways. But so this person had this complex where he had this like pent up aggression and like seemingly sexual energy towards his mom. So Yodo prescribed him to put a picture of his mother's face over a woman that he was having sex with. And it cured it. And he apparently had this intense somatic field, like just so much stuff moving that everything was healed. It's a bit of a weird story, but taking it to that extent, like you can't actually have sex with your mom,
right? But
you can. You can create an environment where the unconscious can receive the message that, okay, I've committed this weird act that you have presented me with. What happens now? Because something's always going to shift. I think it's a Gestalt idea that if you pay attention to something, it's bound to change. And I feel like that's what we're hinting at on like the core level. If you pay attention to something and especially express respect towards it, and you're creating an act that heals something and works with something, it's bound to change.
Yeah. Huh. That's interesting. I mean, I'm trying to think about this in like a psychedelic sense. If sometimes people in like recreational settings, I mean, I've been around friends that just act out bizarre, like narratives.
Yeah.
And I wonder how healing that is, you know, to let it play out and to embody some of those symbols or archetypes and be that or interact with it.
That's the stuff that gets me so excited, is acting from a kind and non-judgmental space Because I think it's really easy to reject it and be like, oh man, you're doing a weird thing.
Right.
But yeah, what is it like to totally encourage that?
Be interesting to explore like psychedelic therapy with like some sort of psychodrama.
I was just about to say that. Oh my God. Psychedelics and expressive therapies, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Because I think it brings out the body so much more.
To be able to move, to be able to express that, huge.
Yeah.
Very huge. And when I was talking to, I think it was Michael Mithofer, I was asking about like, you know, how do you go about maybe doing research? I wanted to do some like somatic stuff with psychedelics or breath work. And he's like, you know, really focus on some sort of psychotherapy or some sort of technique or modality that can really influence psychedelic psychotherapy. So exploring expressive art in depth and seeing how it could be used adjunct to psychedelic psychotherapy.
Yeah, that's been the plan.
Yeah, and it sounds like that's what you're doing, kind of exploring that stuff and seeing how you could weave it into a
crossover.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what all of my teachers, my elders in the psychedelic community have said. Like, you can do psychedelic therapy when it's legal, of course. You can do it, but that can't be the only trick in the bag.
Yeah.
You have to have a diverse set of tools that psychedelics can influence. So totally what you're naming. Yeah. And I think that's the interesting thing right now, how people are dying for a master's degree or a concentration or something in psychedelic psychotherapy. And I know CIIS right now has a certificate training program, which is awesome. But I wonder how that would change the quality of care or how a program like that would look like. We were talking about this before, how since we're in this unique place in history, we can envision so much and actually bring it to life. So what does that look like?
You mean like the future of academia and psychedelics, and if CIIS expanded out of a certificate program into like a master's program or something like that?
Or if Naropa offered a concentration where you can do your full 3 years and then you can stay an additional year and do an intensive in psychedelic psychotherapy, like working to apply 3 years or 2 years of transpersonal therapy into that psychedelic realm, like once you've been trained.
Yeah, we were actually trying to do something along this line, not super clinical, but when I was at Burlington College before it closed, unfortunately, we were trying to develop a transpersonal program, master's program. They had a master's program, but like we were trying to really orient it towards breathwork and psychedelic studies because they kind of moved away from a little bit of the psychedelic stuff, and I brought it back in when I created a capstone project on Stan's theories and breathwork, and then we taught a history of psychedelics course the following year. And so we were on this roll to kind of do a lot of psychedelic education up there. It was perfect because we could tailor it with breathwork. And so we were really planning to do something like that, where you would get a certificate in breathwork, but also get a master's in transpersonal with a focus in psychedelic studies. But unfortunately, like the college kind of, But I don't know. The future, it's going to be interesting to see like what psychedelic education looks like in the future. And me and Joe are having these conversations all the time because, you know, we have the basis of our online curriculum navigating psychedelics. And, you know, we're really trying to think about what does this look like in another year? Like, how are we going to expand on it? And, you know, we definitely have people talking about, it'd be sweet if you get some sort of academic affiliation. It's like, I don't know what kind of college besides CIIS I would pick this up. Yeah. Maybe in a few years.
It's funny. I was sitting with my dear friend Raphael, who you've had on the podcast before. And I mean, it's the same energy that I'm feeling now. It's like a hamster running on a wheel. Like, we're so close, but I'm totally running in place. We were talking about what is the acronym? Like, what would a licensing look like? And like, that's how excited we were. Like, could it be LP? I think it was LPPC, Licensed Professional Psychedelic Counselor. It's like starting to think about stuff like that, like licensing boards and what regulation is going to look like, because it's so close.
Well, I mean, it's interesting too, because right now MAPS really only has the training for MDMA psychotherapy. So they kind of have that training for their therapists that they're doing. And it seems like, with the MDMA therapy, MAPS will be able to hold that for what, like 10 years or something like that? 5 years?
I think 5 after it goes to market.
Okay. And then, CIIS has this certificate program, but yeah, like, will other organizations be able to take on trainings? What would that look like?
What institutions will be willing to provide that training? Because ketamine therapy, I think every organization or groups that are doing it, like ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, I know Phil Wolfson has his own training program. But if you partner with a nurse practitioner or a psychiatrist, that's all you need. Mm-hmm. I could be a therapist right now, partner with a nurse practitioner, and the nurse can prescribe ketamine and I can do the therapy.
Yep.
So it's like, what is that sort of training going to look like? Because it's not necessary in this moment. Could it be at some point? That'd be great if there was some sort of standard, some sort of agreed upon standard.
Yeah.
But as for right now,
there's going to be a psychedelic accreditation board, kind of like how KCREPT or like, these other organizations are out there.
Never in my life did I think I would be excited by the idea of an accreditation board, but here I am.
Well, it's interesting because thinking about all the indigenous people that have been doing this work forever, learning in the underground, learning from their tradition, it's like something like that would kind of take the rights away from those folks,
for sure.
Which is really hard unless you just kind of gave rights to them if they lived in, at a more native place. But could it also be limiting too?
Some sort of licensing board?
Yeah. But, I'm also thinking about like ethics and this and that, where you have maybe some kind of harmful behaviors that are happening, but where are people going to report this? You can't do that right now because it's illegal, but like, would it be helpful to have some sort of board do that so these harmful facilitators or practitioners have some sort of accountability?
That's a really good question. These are dialogues that we need to be having at this point.
Yeah.
It's interesting because like, I think to be an LPC or to have, I think that's in Colorado, but to be a licensed professional counselor, touch isn't allowed.
Right.
And during a ketamine session, if stuff's getting scary, having just a hand on my shoulder has been transformative. Mm-hmm. To remember that I have a body and that this experience is happening, but there's somebody there for me. Instead of my therapist repeatedly saying, "You're safe, I'm here," letting me be in my experience, but just giving me that support. Mm-hmm. Or if something feels like it needs attention, putting just a hand on a part of my body, it's like, I've never felt threatened. I've never felt, unsafe in any way. It's in fact added to my healing. But
right. Well, I even run into that concentrating or having an emphasis in somatics.
Yeah.
Doing body work or this or that. It's like, okay, when I do get licensed, how am I going to approach this work?
Exactly.
Because, coming from the breath work realm, it's like body work usually is towards the end, or, like putting a hand on somebody's shoulder, holding their hand, like, I don't know. Yeah, it gets confusing. And I think, as these fields are starting to evolve and grow, they're definitely going to need to look at it and see where to make some changes and whatnot. But, I think there's valid reasons for having those guidelines or ethics of not putting your hand, because probably how many practitioners probably had sex with their clients, So,
and especially adding psychedelics into the mix, I could see accountability getting really serious.
Yeah,
because that's a very vulnerable space to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And my therapist has never put a hand on me without consent. It's always been, would you like a hand right now?
I think that's important. That's the most important thing is communication, and, it's a relationship, right? Exactly. So you need to have that consent, have that open dialogue, make sure you're not crossing any boundaries and doing this thing where it's like, I know what you need, right?
Exactly.
Like your story the best. You kind of sometimes know what you need.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the client-centered approach of like, you know exactly what you need. We're going to go at your speed is the most healing thing, because that validates, the inner healer. Mm-hmm. And I think in this culture, the inner healer isn't as prized.
Right.
if that makes sense. It's not seen as this gift, this huge healing gift.
Yeah. So let's dig in a little bit about your experience. I mean, this is kind of exciting. You're studying to be a psychedelic psychotherapist. You've done some stuff with Zendo. I mean, you're a night attendant. What is it like to be on the receiving end of, and ketamine's not really technically considered a psychedelic or a classic psychedelic, but it induces dissociative, sometimes transpersonal states, right? So to be legally receiving this work, I mean, yeah, what is that like? Or
it's not even trying to be dramatic, but groundbreaking. It is definitely the greatest gift I've gotten in this point in my life. I notice so much. Sorry, it's ineffable. It's totally ineffable. Being a woman who has had warped views of herself for her whole life, dissociation was a really big thing. My friend Sarah Gale, who she is the harm reduction director at MAPS and runs the Zendo project, and also is a ketamine therapist. And
I didn't know she was doing that.
Yeah,
oh, that's
so
awesome.
She's doing ketamine work as well.
Cool.
She said that ketamine dissociates you from dissociation, which I think sounds
like
a little
dull negative or something.
But for me, what it's been doing is allowing that inner critic, that dissociation, that part that says, like, we're not going here, this isn't safe, like, I need to protect this traumatized self. It allows that piece of me to take a break. So my innate healer can come online and actually start to show me some of the difficult stuff that I have to work through. Sometimes it can be really, really pleasurable. Sometimes it could be, one of my last sessions, it felt like having a calm nervous system for the first time, like fully parasympathetic. I was breathing deep into my belly. I felt safe and comfortable, which is pretty unusual for me. So sometimes it's just trying out what feeling safe feels like, and sometimes it's letting the dissociated part, it basically says, you don't need to be protected right now. Like, the ketamine allows me to listen to myself and trust my body. And it's definitely transformed my relationship as a feminist, as a relationship as, a woman at all. And
how so?
I feel safe in my body. I feel happy in my body. I trust my body. I've been finding that I've been, like, actually standing a little taller, like feeling like I don't have to curl up. Over. Yeah. It changes me on a really, really deep level. And something that I love is that it's 2 hours. Normally the rest of that day I put aside for myself, just for going on a walk, resting, because it is a lot of energy output. But yeah, it doesn't take up an entire day. And for somebody who has done a lot of therapy in the past, and my life kind of revolves around self-work, because I feel as a therapist, I have to do the work. Definitely. I have to be able to lend a calm nervous system to clients. So being in my best shape is integral for helping others heal.
Yeah, self-care is so important. Yeah. And doing your own work is so important. What is it like compared to, say, other psychedelic experiences?
That's where I was going.
Okay, yes. Awesome. Sure. Mind reader.
You're on my wavelength now. It's amazing because it's, I can work on one little chunk, whereas, like, MDMA psychotherapy, which is needed and so important, but a difference for me is that MDMA psychotherapy can blast your world right open, can get to the core of it, can initiate healing on a deep level, specifically MDMA-assisted psychotherapy. I think MDMA innately has healing qualities, but I guess I'm strictly talking about in the therapeutic setting, in the legal therapeutic setting. That is 8 hours of digging in and pulling apart and healing and looking and, letting avoidance unfold because you have all day. Ketamine is like chipping away at it. And that constantly coming back. It's like a meditation. Like, whenever you realize your mind is out there, just coming right back. And that process of looking at avoidance, for me personally, looking at an avoidant pattern and saying, okay, like, I can work on a tiny piece of this today. I don't have to have a humongous goal. It can just be to look at anger, to look at myself in interpersonal relationships. I can work on smaller pieces of myself and know that I'll be back in 2 weeks.
Right. That seems like beneficial to be able to take little chunks instead of planning out these whole big sessions and like really dedicating so much time and energy.
They both have their place in time.
Yeah, definitely.
But I think for somebody who is, I'd say I'm like high functioning. I'm a high functioning adult.
I mean, you're in grad school.
I'd like to think that. But I definitely have baggage. I definitely have trauma that I want to work through. Yeah. But there's something magical thinking about, people who work, we're in New York City right now, people who work in New York City who don't have the time to take off one day and, spend that whole day processing. And then the next few days needing to be gentle with yourselves. Like, I couldn't imagine finishing an MDMA session and trying to catch the L. I would not. My body couldn't do it.
No, I don't think I could either.
But after a ketamine session, I think it creates greater accessibility for people of all different socioeconomic statuses, because a 2-hour session versus paying someone for 8 hours. These are things we need to be considering as psychedelic therapists. How are our treatments accessible? And they may still be expensive, but 2 hours is far less than 8.
Right. Well, let's talk about that. Like, how are you receiving treatment? What does that look like? I know there's different models, and, there definitely has been some criticisms on how expensive some of these therapies are. Especially ketamine therapy. Sometimes I've seen around, like $500 a session, depending.
Those are typically infusions, right?
Infusions, I think so, yeah. So what's your protocol? How are you working with this medicine? And however, like in depth, you can. Yeah.
So I'm working with a therapist out of Innate Path. Innate Path is an amazing clinic that's opening up in Denver right now. Or Lakewood, right outside of Denver. They're doing ketamine and cannabis-assisted therapy. They are breaking some serious ground.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I'm working with a therapist who's on their team, and 2-hour session. I don't know what they're pricing out of the clinic right now. But I think you do a series. How I'm doing it was pre-clinic. So I got kind of grandfathered into a certain model.
Oh, okay, awesome.
But I think they have a little bit more structured of an approach now. But I've been doing it every other week for 2 hours. I work with sublingual troches, which are, I don't know how it compares to insufflation for absorption rate, but it's strong enough to create a healing experience, but a lower enough dose that I can still communicate and I can still be a functioning person and be with my body, as opposed to completely dissociating, not being in my body at all.
Awesome. And then a therapist is with you the whole time?
Yeah.
Okay. So much different than some of the infusion way people are going, where you just get maybe like tiny dose or smaller doses without psychotherapy. So you're doing it with some sort of psychotherapy.
I've heard that intramuscular and intravenous, the infusions are way stronger.
Yeah.
They last, I've heard a little bit longer. Like, you're coming up super quick and you stay rather stable on the length of how long you're in that, like the peak of it, I guess you could say. And then the come down's a little bit slower, whereas the troches are like a little bit more wave-like.
Oh, okay.
So that's the difference. But that's what it looks like for me. It's 2 hours every Monday morning. That's how I start my week.
That's awesome. And I'm guessing it's probably cheaper, because I remember when we were talking with Dr. Scott Shannon that the lozenges are pretty cheap compared to, say, an infusion or an injection.
I got 12 sessions from a compounding pharmacy in Lakewood for, I believe, like $60.
Yeah.
Which is like
that's
dirt cheap.
Yeah.
Compared to, $500 a session.
Right.
It's like, I believe that it's important from the therapist's point of view to set a standard of excellence, meaning somebody should financially invest in this healing. It should be some sort of investment. It shouldn't be so cheap that someone can just be like, oh, cool, I'll do a session or two. And like, people should commit to this work. But what I'm always grappling with is, how can it be accessible? Because especially, Boulder is a little bit of a white bubble.
Yes.
It's not a...
It's kind of like Burlington.
It's not
I
a
get
secret.
it. Yeah.
But, once you get into Denver, once you get into any city, there are marginalized populations and people of color who have way deeper types of trauma. And, is me, a white woman, the perfect person to administer that healing? Maybe not. But can I at least do my best to make this work accessible? Like, I'm going to do my absolute hardest, do my best, to make that accessible. So where's like a safe price for this work to be, me to be making a living, me to be able to support myself just from this work? And how can people access it? Because I think that's an issue that we're naming, is that like, there's no way I could pay $500 a session.
No way. But
this work has changed my life. This has made me, I think, a more pleasant person to be around.
Yeah, it's tricky, I don't know, later down the line, will insurance companies be able to back some of this work? Will it all have to be out of pocket? Like, yeah, even with MDMA therapy, how much is that going to run? You have 8-hour sessions plus maybe an overnight, like... So, how much is that going to cost people? And will insurance be able to back it? So, which, I think, our friend Will and Monica Williams are exploring the race-based trauma and MDMA therapy and talking about accessibility and stuff like that, which is awesome. And I think they have some sponsorships to help people that, I don't know, don't quote me on that. I can't remember. They did talk about it at their race.
You went to that event.
I did, yeah.
I was so disappointed that I landed 2 days after it. Yeah. I was a night attendant for a woman who's on that team as a therapist. And just hearing about the work that they're doing, I'm really, really proud of MAPS for having a site with that focus. I think that's going to be groundbreaking. And especially because it's all people of color, to the best of my knowledge, right? Or mostly
they're trying to recruit, I think.
Meaning the therapists and the...
Oh, the therapists. Well, I guess I only know 2 of them, and they are people of color.
Yeah.
I don't know who else is on that team.
A woman that I worked with.
Oh, wait. No, the 3 people. Yeah. So I know the 3 people that are working there, and they're, people of color.
Yeah. I think that's important.
Oh, definitely.
Because I think the projections that could play out if you had, let's say, one white therapist and one therapist of color, it could be very interesting to have those projections thrown at a white person and having them take it.
Yeah.
And having that, being able to have that ally and also being able to like work with that projection and heal it in the here and now. That's heavily romanticized in my brain, but I think it's going to do a lot of good. I think I'm interested and beyond excited to see where that site takes their work.
Yeah, me too. And that talk was awesome. Hopefully they have more stuff like that. I don't know if anybody recorded it. I'm hoping somebody did.
I got my fingers crossed.
Yeah, maybe I had all my recording equipment. I should have just
thrown it out.
Yeah, but I didn't because I didn't get any permission beforehand. But so what else do you want to chat about? I know we had a list of things here. Did you feel like you wanted to cover any more about your ketamine therapy?
That feels pretty concise. You can put my contact info on the website, and if anybody would want to communicate about the experience, I'd be happy to go more in depth. But
cool. And maybe really quick, since there are these different ways about doing ketamine therapy, what would you look for? I know some places they just do infusions without psychotherapy. Like maybe we're biased because we're studying to be
it is important to name the bias.
Yeah, we definitely are.
Yeah, it's pretty clear.
Sorry, everybody.
If you can afford infusions and you can also find a transpersonally oriented therapist, that might not be a bad route to go down. I think, obviously, like we keep saying, we are biased, but I think a few sessions can do the trick. I think it doesn't have to be a long-standing thing. I think I've kind of been pulling a John C. Lilly this last year and going in deep just for the sake of knowing the territory because this is the work I want to do. And what a year it has been. I got to sit down with my partner and really talk about what have you seen in this last year? How have I changed? And I think it's hard to tell somebody you love, like, here's the ways you were kind of fucking up before. And here's where you are now. And I think it's worth it. Even if it is a bit costly, I mean, always ask the therapist if they can do a sliding scale, if they can do payment plans. That this work has changed my life. And though it may not be for everybody, I know a lot of practitioners who like to stay with organic plant matters. Like, I totally respect that, but chemicals have their place.
Yeah. And, it's just interesting. I think ever since Pollen's book came out, we've been getting like a lot of emails recently. How do I find a guide? How do I do this? How do I do that? And,
Always do your research.
Legally, we can't really tell you how to do that. Yeah. But legally, you have ketamine therapy, you have breath work, you have different psychotherapies that, might be just as healing, might take a little bit longer. But, I always end up referring people to check out ketamine or breath work.
Because those
are the things where we're at
legally,
right now.
Here is my response.
Or, go to Jamaica or go to Peru or go somewhere where these things are legal.
Yeah. I believe there's a website. I don't know if you're affiliated with them, but it's kind of like a running list of psychedelic psychotherapists or people who are transpersonally oriented, not psychedelic psychotherapists, but transpersonally oriented, psychedelically keen therapists. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so there's two lists that I know of. So there's you have the MAPS list, and then you have psychedelic.support.
That's what I'm thinking of.
So that's the website, psychedelic.support. And you can search by, if you want a medical doctor, a psychiatrist, a psychotherapist, a counselor, and you can kind of filter your searches that way.
Yeah, because I think for psychotherapists that have done their training in, let's say 10 years ago, I think this can be a jarring concept for some people. It can be a jarring concept. But I don't know, I think it can be really integral to have a therapist that honors transpersonal experiences and not only honors them, but really can bring them into a space and you can amplify, psychedelic experiences, amplify dreams, amplify images.
Yeah.
I think that's the space that I hope to hold for my clients. Is that safe, secure, anything is welcome. Like we were saying before, when people act out strange, and not even strange, but just like deep archetypal imagery, how can we encourage that? Because I think that's where the real healing is, whether it's through breath work, whether any transpersonal practice. How can a therapist not only support, but like dive into it with you?
Yeah, I had somebody reach out recently that they were receiving some ketamine therapy and their therapist just could not understand the landscape.
Yeah.
And it is tricky because some of these experiences are just so hard. And it's like, if you've been there before, you're just familiar with non-ordinary experiences. It's just, I don't know. Yeah, it's maybe a little bit easier to understand it versus somebody that's never had an experience with it. And maybe that's why we're kind of biased towards maybe transpersonally oriented or people that just understand the experience. I've definitely been to a therapist in the past that questioned my use and they're like, I just don't understand it. Like, how dangerous this is. And I'm just like,
because they don't know any
better. They don't know. And it made me feel like crap where I was just like, I know what I'm doing is healing me, but now you're just kind of shaming me before.
Yeah. And how does that damage the rapport?
Well, I stopped going to them, obviously. I was like, well, this isn't working out.
Yeah.
But I was a lot younger then. So it was just like I was just navigating the landscape. So yeah, we have a few more minutes left before we start wrapping up. But yeah, another question, maybe it's like a two-part question is, and we kind of touched on it a little bit before, but, we're kind of young professionals, we're in grad school, we're hoping to get licensed. We're kind of at the forefront of this, which is really interesting. You have the elders that have done it, they're passing their wisdom down. But if MAPS is successful with their clinical trials, fingers crossed, MDMA therapy will be hopefully legalized by 2021. And, we have this kind of career in the future, which I don't know, it's kind of crazy to even think about. But yeah, what is it like to be at kind of like the forefront of this or just having envisioning that this is a possibility? And also, what is it like to be a woman and doing all this stuff as well?
Ooh, what a good question. I feel like every step forward that I take is on an incline. It's difficult and exciting and easy. It's like somehow every polarity at once, which is a very transpersonal answer. But I think as a woman, It helps me move past the guilt and the shame that like is the first threshold of being social like justice oriented. Being able to see my power and my privilege and how all the ways that I really utilize my privilege and how I can, kind of stop doing that and use my power as a therapist to help heal. I think being at this point, wanting to be a psychedelic psychotherapist and being in, ketamine therapy, it's let me take a lot of responsibility on that I didn't know I could hold. I think previously, I don't really know if it had to do with my gender or trauma, but there was this sense of inferiority that I felt about myself, that I wasn't totally sure how much I was capable of, what I can hold. And I think I'm a lot more powerful than I let myself believe.
Doing a lot of awesome things. So
Thank you. And staying humble. I think it's really, really easy to be like, oh my God, cool, I'm a psychedelic therapist. And it's like, no, I haven't. I got a long way to go before I can claim that title fully. And yeah, I think a really big value of mine is being willing to look at both ends of the spectrum. Being transpersonally oriented, but also still keeping my feet in academia, my feet on the ground, and researching neuroscience and researching more traditional therapeutic approaches and being well-rounded. I think that as I prepared and get closer and closer to that place, that is a huge value, being able to hold both ends. Because it would be great to just dive down the transpersonal rabbit hole and never come back. And you know what I mean? But that's not how, I don't know, that doesn't seem like I'll be able to provide adequate care.
My shamanic teacher told me that too. He's like, yeah, you could have your foot in the transpersonal world, but it's really good to be well-rounded.
Yeah.
It's good to understand the clinical language, be able to really have your foot in those worlds.
Yeah. And I think that's a perfect metaphor for what I'm explaining with, being social justice oriented and being like an activism oriented feminist, is that there's a sense of responsibility that I think is so easy to ignore. And just how it's easy to have these transpersonal experiences and, in the therapeutic setting and feel sensation in my body for the first time and begin to listen and trust my body. But how does that translate to out of the therapeutic space? How does that translate to, using my voice to represent populations that don't necessarily have a platform or aren't given the respect to have a platform? So I think that's a top priority as I move forward in my identity as a psychedelic therapist is, the work can't just be in the therapeutic space. It can't just be on an interpersonal level. That there's a sense of responsibility that I definitely would like to see the community take a little more. I'm not saying people aren't doing it, but a direction that I'd love to see the psychedelic therapy, specifically community, go in is using the platform and resources for people who need it, people who need healing definitely a little more than I do.
How would you go about doing that?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think a simple, tangible answer is being able to see, a ketamine client once a week pro bono, being able to do a couple sessions pro bono, being able to work at a severely discounted rate, making sure that this work, being able to train in this work is accessible for people of color, is accessible for people of any gender, people of any gender expression. Yeah. I think that's inaccessible. Of course, there are like ginormous dreams that I could say, but I feel like it's clean, it's clear, it's accessible.
Yeah. It's so important. And it's something we're going to have to figure out moving forward.
Yeah. Being willing to look at our blind spots and name them and removing defensiveness. I feel like the passivity that ketamine has gifted me with has let me be like, oh yeah, that's totally an internalized, for example, like an internalized form of oppression, or that's some sort of internalized judgment, and being able to not be like, oh, damn, I'm bad. Like, I need to close off. I shouldn't be in a relationship, but in staying in that power and being like, okay, I just did something, or I said something offensive or, not quite cool. And how can I heal? How can I let that person share their experience with me? Yeah. That responsibility. It's like, it's not all, I heard a woman who's New York City based, her name is Rachel Cargill. she said recently, I don't want your love and light if it doesn't come with protest and activism. And that's been really guiding for me, is like, it can't just be like, yeah, I'm an ally, but it actually is doing that work, finding solutions, and not just letting my psychedelic experiences be something that benefits me, but can,
Right. Yeah. How do you take that, just these experiences that are so personal, and really offer them to the world in such a different way? And I think we're starting to see a lot of that within this community. People are starting to speak out about certain issues and step forward. And, I think it's great that, we have a platform where we can share these voices and get these ideas and conversations out there. And I mean, that's been like a big part, I guess, about feeling privileged and a white guy and having this. It's like, okay, well, how do I really leverage that and get voices that aren't really heard out there all the time, and really try to make this a community platform versus, it's just about us.
Inclusivity and accessibility, I think, is we're moving towards it as a community. I think people are starting, like you said, people are starting to talk about it, but it's awesome, the position that I'm personally in, because art is such a great form of activism. Art is such an amazing form of activism. So how can I encourage people to use artistic expression as a way to get deep feeling across? Can I read you a quote really quick?
Yeah.
So relevant. Ooh, I knew I did this for a reason.
The first thing that popped in my head when you said that, of like art as activism, I just kept thinking of Banksy, all of his art. And I mean,
I asked myself, what could a beneficial artist be? A good magician whose works of art could be charged with such positive force that they would push a spectator into ecstasy. And it's like, whereas that can sound very like best case scenario, how can art be charged with such feeling that someone could be moved to understand such deep feeling and such a deep point of view that like may not be their own? Like, how can we just be magicians that make people feel deeply?
Yes. Whether that is visual art, like video. The first thing that came to my mind actually was, you ever watched that movie Samsara or Baraka? Baraka was the first one. Samsara was the second one. And
Koya Naskatsi too, right? Is it the same?
I don't know, but I mean that movie Baraka just moved me. I mean, it's just visual images and scenarios with music, no words. And if you watch that, I mean, that feeling of ecstasy and heartbreak and everything, just all there. And it's like, there's no words to it. It was just watching these images and movie or like music behind it. It was just like, very psychedelic too, in a sense.
And I think that's totally what I'm naming, is that deep, how can people get out of their own way and use artistic expression to help move others, to be understood, and like also understand yourself. Like, there have been pieces that I've done that I hold so dearly to me because, I actually see myself now. It's like the clearest mirror I've ever seen is looking at an art piece, and it's like, this is this part I've been grappling with. This piece of myself that I've been trying to reject is like now physically in front of me, and I can't run.
The importance of revisiting.
Yeah, like you were saying before, totally.
So
being able to see it.
Yeah. And, that also, I think, helps you understand like how much you've grown too, or maybe where you're still hung up in. I always go back and read journals entries, and I'm just like, man, I was... it's just so funny. You're like, I'm either still writing about the same thing or I've just grown so much from it. It's interesting. Sweet. Well, I think we're, over an hour. So any last words, or where can people find you?
Well, I can be found on social media. I love new friends. Please feel free to reach out to me, ask any questions. It's truly my privilege to be as accessible as possible to help other young folks, folks of all age, get involved in this community, because it really is such a privilege. Alyssa Gursky, I think my name will be spelled out on the podcast. Yeah. My website is psychedelicarttherapy.com. Please feel free. I have an email sign up, so when things progress with my practice, research, art, I'm going to be loading the website with that. So awesome. I'd love to build a community around that. I mean, this podcast won't air before the COSM training, but
No, unfortunately, and I wish we were doing this afterwards so we could hear all about it. But yeah, Alyssa's going up to COSM to help out with the Zendo training up there.
Otherwise, that's where I can be found. I'm living in Boulder most of the time, so.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much. And
Thank
it was
you.
great to actually connect in person and do this and hopefully not have any of the weird hardware stuff. But yeah, thanks so much. And we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Thank you guys.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Psychedelics Today. Hope you enjoyed this interview with Alyssa Gursky. She's a rising individual in the field, and I think we're going to see a lot of great stuff from her in the future involving art therapy and whatever else she decides to get involved with. And yeah, if you liked the episode, definitely hit us up. Psychedelics Today email at gmail.com. You can leave us a review on Facebook or iTunes. Either one would be lovely. If you want to stay safe out there and help your friends stay safe during festival season, we have a class we're selling called Navigating Psychedelics. It is pretty awesome. You can find it from our site, psychedelicstoday.com. We help you understand conceptually how to think about psychedelics in a safe, reasonable manner, how to stay grounded, how to stay out of jail and hospitals, how to do drug testing, and how to probably get something from the psychedelic experience. A lot of people are looking to get something out of it, not just party, though there's nothing wrong with partying. I enjoy it. So, why not also just stay safe in all of those situations and get some benefit if there is some there to get. So the real benefit is that we have about 12 individual master classes at the tail end of the course from different experts all around the psychedelic space. And I think there's a lot of value there. So check that out and see if you're into it. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you hate it, you can return it. We'll give you money back. If you buy it in the next, before the end of the month, you get a $30 credit for a t-shirt from our store. You have to pay for shipping, but you get a $30 store credit over at our Psychedelics Today shop.com site. So yeah, maybe you like it, maybe you don't, but I think education is always worth having. So be safe out there, everybody. Have fun and tune in next time. Bye-bye.